So then, should we see the government increase undocumented workers' rights?
I think so. I mean, I believe that it's a labor force that we need. I think it's a labor force that we can't do without. I think, as Victor said, historically, it's one that we've dealt with in the past. And so I just don't see an economy without, or for that matter, society, culturally, how we exist without immigration and immigrants.
How large of a problem would you say people being paid unfair wages is?
In this economy, it's increased. I know in our field it has. And in the private sector, I couldn't really tell you, but again, the sign of the times is that we're in a tough economy.
Victor, Meg Whitman and other politicians talk about guest worker programs. Could you explain a little bit about what that is?
Well, a guest worker program is someone who comes into the country to work in the industry for a set amount of times. It started back in the 1940s. It ended in 1962 or 64 under President Johnson. So it's when a country, United States, and industry collaborate to recruit workers for a set amount of time. So it might be a 6-month period, a 3-month period, a year period, and that worker is given a right to come into the country and work, but doesn't have the right to stay. And so then they go back. So once the term guest is applied.
So right now we're not using that program?
No, we do not. Now the irony is we don't have a guest worker program that we have as one I described, but there are programs that bring workers from Mexico into the United States for a temporary, and then they go back to Mexico to work. So there is some form of a guest worker program today.
Okay, so if we implemented a large-scale guest worker program again, do you think that would be a benefit to the American economy?
Well, I think the answer would be yes. People argue that as long as we can get that unskilled worker in the economy, that helps. But if you're asking me, do I think that's what we should do? The answer is no, because as people know, the worker comes, spends many years, not just 6 months. That's an anomaly when someone comes for 6 months or even a year. So you're talking about someone that comes over for 3, 4, 6, even 10 years, and that person now is vested in the United States. We should and are obligated to welcome that person as a full participant and citizen of the country. So it's not, should we allow undocumented workers to stay here or welcome them? The first question is, how do we do with immigrants? And the reason they're undocumented is because they haven't gone through the process. So the first thing is, what do we do with the immigrant for the last 22 years who's come to the United States, who's been working, who's been living, who's been part of society, has had no problems with the law? You've got to make them documented, and then figure out, okay, how do they become part of the society? Because it's a whole step. You just don't, move a wand and say everybody's now a citizen. It's not what happened in 1986 with the last immigration law. You gave them a certain status, then they had to take a test, and they go through the process, and then they become a citizen. But it's a process. We haven't done that with millions and millions of people.
And the problem that I have with that, especially working with the immigrant community on a daily basis, is that it creates a second-class citizen. That don't have the same rights as other workers, maybe doing the same kind of work.
Well, and it's not just rights. If an undocumented resident and worker in the United States is, as Frank says, not accessing government services, so if they're not going and getting medical care, and they're playing with other children at the park or going to school with other children, and they're ill, and the illness is contagious, that contagious disease doesn't distinguish between a documented or an undocumented 7-year-old kid, and so that's a threat to our health in our society. Secondly, if an undocumented resident doesn't want to call the police in fear of deportation, and they see a crime going down, they don't call the police because they don't want to be caught in the middle of this thing. That's not safe for our streets. So there's a number of repercussions that society is vulnerable on if we don't do something about a huge population. And if you go into certain communities, it's not just 3% in the country. In a particular community, you're talking about 20%, 25% that's undocumented. And that community, as Frank says, is a second-class citizen, but then they act like it. And so they don't fully participate. They don't protect their neighbor. They don't protect their children in terms of health. And so they will become very, very vulnerable.
Yeah, having anybody in your community that lives in the shadows is never good for either the person living in the shadows or for the community.
How does your company work to improve the community?
Well, I have a public affairs consulting company, and our job is to educate communities so they can act in their best interest. And so we do a number of work in education, transportation, infrastructure, et cetera. So our job is to educate the community so they can act on their best interest.
Is it possible for illegal immigrants to become involved in the voting process?
No, absolutely not. I mean, just the term you just said, illegal. If they don't have legal status in the country, they can't vote.
So those people that are saying there was some kind of, they influenced the last presidential election, that's just...
No, that's not true.
No, the legal immigrants and the legal citizens that are Latino that look the same, because if you put illegal and legal, they both look Mexican, or they both look Latino. It was the legal ones that influenced the election, not the undocumented.
Do you think that the government is doing enough in policing fair pay?
No, because like everything else, it's business oriented, and whoever has the most influence.
What more can
business
be done?
has influence.
What more can be done to make these penalties stick?
Increase the penalties. Make the penalties misdemeanors. They're breaking the law. Especially because in our field it has to do with public money.
Victor, why is it important to increase voter registration and promote citizenship?
Well, when you vote, you're keeping the government officials accountable. And when you don't vote, the elected officials who are the stewards of public money and public trust won't have anyone to keep them accountable. So the more people who are voting, the more people who are actively involved in democracy will make sure that we have a strong and transparent government.
How do you get in the lower income neighborhoods and make sure they participate?
You educate. I mean, education spurs activity. So the more education, the more awareness people have and faith that they have in the government, then they'll participate.
Can you tell me a little bit about your own personal experiences with undocumented workers?
Well, about 1992, we got involved in trying to organize painters in the painters union that was trying to get drywall workers involved in an organizing drive. And it wasn't so much of undocumented workers, it was about immigrant workers, because a number of them were documented, but they weren't involved in the organizing world of labor. And so there was a big effort to organize, and a very successful effort. So there's been many efforts historically to organize immigrant workers, and the unions traditionally in the country have been very successful at that. They've done that in the garment industry, they've done it in the service industry, and the construction industry, and so there's been many successes to organize immigrant workers.
Do you think it's possible for California to pass a similar law to Arizona, or like Arizona has passed?
I don't see it happening in California.
Well, the irony is California attempted to do that in 1994 with Proposition 187, and it was just like the Arizona law, declared unconstitutional by the federal courts. So, no.
Okay, well that's all we have time for. I'd like to thank my guests, Frank Negrete and Victor Griego, for joining me today. You've been watching On Point. I'm Greg Donnell. Have a great day.
The responsibility for immigration is a federal issue, and that was established back in 1792 with the first Alien Amnesty Act. And then the federal court said that the federal government is responsible for immigration. So this country for 200 years has said that the body that handles immigration is the federal government, not states.